This video is about Artifact. There's been quite a lot of discussion about this game. Valve's Golden Child has been under a fair bit of scrutiny, and arguments abound. But as you parse through the mass of threads and discussion, you start to see commonalities, the same few faces repeated throughout a crowd. And there is no face so familiar to us, so recognizable, as that of RNG, which comes as no surprise. RNG is important. RNG has outsized effects, and there are places in Artifact where its implementation is downright questionable. Which is why we are going to avoid talking about it altogether. Because RNG is also well-treaded territory. It is our favorite scapegoat, our punching bag of choice, the forever fresh easy target that, unfortunately, tends to eclipse some of the other elements of play. So today, let's try a different tack. Today, let's talk about Artifact without the RNG. In fact, let's go even further. Let's talk about Artifact without all of the usual touchstones. Nothing about the market economy, nothing about RNG, nothing about card imbalance, turn timers, or pay to play. Instead, let's delve into more subtle elements of play, the less explicated fundamentals, the nitty and gritty. So put down your pitchforks and grab your machetes, because today we venture deep into that dark jungle called the relatively unknown. Let's start simple. Cause and effect. Input, output. Most games make this uncomplicated. You do a thing. If it was a good thing, the game rewards you. If it was a bad thing, the game punishes you. Fundamentally, most games can be broken down into these kinds of simple incentives. Carrots and sticks. It's a teaching tool, a way to reinforce desired behavior. Normally, this is universal enough to not even bear mentioning, but Artifact is notable in how it seems to buck the trend. Let's take a look at what I mean. Most games are loaded with unambiguously positive outcomes. It's one of the primary levers game designers use to promote correct lines of play. A strong signal saying, this is what you're supposed to be doing. Good job. In Dota, killing an enemy hero is a good thing. You get gold, the enemy loses gold, and you get a nifty period of time where the other hero is out of commission, limiting their options. There's no trade-off here. It's all good, all positive. The worst thing that could be said is that taking the time to kill an enemy hero was possibly less good compared to other options at that time. But it is unarguable that the results are purely good in terms of providing your side with more resources to win the game, and the other side with less, unambiguously skewing the odds of victory in your team's favor. Not so with Artifact. In Artifact, killing an enemy hero gives you the same sort of good things. You get gold. You clear space on the board that allows damage to go through. You limit or completely block off lines of play for the opponent. If they have no more heroes of that color in the lane, you can even prevent them from playing cards. All good, positive feedback stuff. But in Artifact, it also gives the opponent a good thing. In Artifact, killing an enemy hero means the opponent receives the ability to redeploy that killed hero, fully healed, in whatever lane they choose after 2 turns. While this may not sound like much, cross-lane mobility is limited in Artifact. Save for a few items and spells, death is the primary way of being able to move heroes from one lane to another, of reallocating significant resources from one lane to another. At times, this good for the opponent can outweigh the advantage gained by the player. This also holds true with Artifact's equipment. Just like in other games, equipment in Artifact provides you with good things. Heroes with this equipment acquire more utility with active and passive benefits, but also notably with an increase in lump stats. In most games, increasing stats in this way is once again an unambiguous good, but in Artifact, this comes, once again, with trade-offs. There are times where you would prefer not killing an opposing hero, when you would prefer locking them in the lane for as long as possible. There are times you would like to avoid having an enemy unit killed, only to have it replaced with a larger threat. You can raise your hero's health just enough to keep it out of the range of death, only to realize turns later that you would have been better served intentionally letting it die to have it in a more relevant position later in the game. In a twisted bit of logic, the more health and armor a hero has, the less mobile they become. The stronger the hero, the more mobile they make the enemy. Generally speaking, having these extra stats is obviously a net positive, but it remains that in Artifact, these trade-offs exist where there would normally be an absolute positive. But why do these trade-offs matter? Let us once again look to Dota as a point of comparison. Both games are undoubtedly complicated. Both games are bound with complex interlocking mechanics, where one simple action like killing a hero has a whole host of effects across as many systems. But where Dota has many moments that give clear feedback, goals, and objectives that shout unambiguous good, Things like killing a hero, taking down a tower, taking down Rax, killing Roshan. Artifact has trade-offs. Most mechanics in Artifact push back towards the middle in some way. They offer some competing edge or benefit that has to be measured against. What would otherwise be a clear signal pushing players towards optimizing for an unambiguously positive outcome instead becomes another note of additional complexity, yet another factor that has to be evaluated. How do I kill this hero becomes, should I even kill this hero if it lets him redeploy to another lane? For Artifact, a goalpost becomes yet another fork in the road. And when players fail to notice these trade-offs, they build and map onto a sense of impotency. Choices seem to lose meaning. Players feel like there is little they can do to affect the outcome, aside from obvious undeniable shifts like time of triumph. It feels like the game artificially endeavors to set up every win or loss to be on a knife's edge, to be a game of inches. Because it absolutely does. Artifact is built around this idea of enforced equilibrium. It is the central point around which everything else revolves, the frame that makes everything seem to click into place. When many of the fundamental mechanics of the game come with built-in trade-offs, it means that the tug-of-war that is Artifact never veers too far off-center. But without this context, players end up feeling impotent and frustrated. They feel trapped in what feels like an endless uphill battle. However, like with most things Artifact, it's not quite that simple. We cannot simply point to trade-offs and equilibrium as our fresh new culprits and call it a day. There are other factors at play here, other fundamentals, that contribute to this generalized feeling of frustration. So let us now turn our attention to the structure of Artifact's turns themselves. Many trading card games tend to have a clearly defined my turn and opponent turn distinction. One phase in which you are free to spend resources and direct actions with limited to no interference on the part of the opponent, and one phase where you are likewise inhibited in interrupting the opponent's line of play. Generally what this means is, if it is the player's turn, they are allowed a string of actions with minimal interruption from the non-active player. This creates an ebb and flow to turns, shifting back and forth between periods of sustained action during the player's turn and smaller breaks of passive observation and planning during the opponent's turn. Artifact has no such respite. In Artifact, turns occur concurrently. Both players are always in their active states. Both players always have access to their full suite of options, switching priority back and forth between each and every action taken. Artifact has no planning phase and no execution of plan phase. Players are forever in both. The closest thing to a rest is the item buying phase, a mini phase that tends to end quickly, after which the players thrust once again into the hero deployment phase, arguably the most important and tasking decision of the game. As a result, rather than an ebb and flow tempo, both players are constantly actively planning and re-evaluating lines of play in response to each other's most recent action. A turn of Artifact ends up looking something like this. You make a plan and execute the first action of that plan. Then, the opponent does something to make that plan impossible, so you make a new plan. Imagine, for instance, that your plan was to Aghanim Sanctum, use it to refresh mana, and then cast Thunder God's Wrath. Clean, efficient use of resources. But this efficient play is vulnerable to counterplay. If a player were to follow this plan and Aghanim Sanctum first, there would be many things your opponent could do in response to disrupt your plan. They could equip their hero with a Traveler's Cloak, to escape lethal range of your Thunder God's Wrath. They could reduce your total mana with a card like Tyler's Shade Censor. They could kill, stun, or silence your hero outright, so you'd be left with an Aghanim Sanctum with nothing to spend mana on. If any of these things were to happen, a player would be left scrambling to figure out something new to do, their previous plan made irrelevant. Of course, it is not as though players are constantly getting blindsided every turn. As players gain experience with the game, they naturally grow to understand how to structure their plans to take such interruptions into account. In our earlier scenario, you could make the call to simply start with the Thunder God's Wrath, to make sure your big ticket action to turn goes through no matter what. But it remains that even with such hedging, planning an artifact is always a fluid, mutable process. Interruptions are expected. They are inevitable. This constant planning and subsequent discarding of plans is core to the experience of Artifact. There is always a sense of improvisation, an ever-branching decision tree that players try to force into their favor. The results speak for themselves. What you get in Artifact is tense and ever-shifting gameplay where players are kept on their toes. It's invigorating, completely engaging. But it is also extremely exhausting. If planning through a course of action can be considered the most mentally involved action in most trading card games, then Artifact regularly requires this effort multiple times a turn. Game lengths and turn timers are often pointed to as reasons for why players find it difficult to stick to Artifact and play for multiple games at a time, and these reasons are true. But it is also the very nature of Artifact itself, the way it demands that players be constantly mentally checked in, and when this mental effort is consistently made irrelevant, it can contribute towards a sense of mental fatigue. Now, this doesn't just happen because of Artifact's turn structure, because it's not just the concurrent turns, it's not just passing priority back and forth. There's a third more subtle element here that completes this trifecta: effect resolution. Effect resolution in Artifact is very simple. If you have initiative, you can execute any one action. Then, that effect resolves instantly with no chance for interruption. Initiative is a promise to the player. Whatever you choose, whatever card, whatever action, it will happen. Initiative means absolute priority. The train has already left the station. The rockets are launched and in transit. The effect will resolve. It's already happening. The other side can do nothing but wait until those same godly powers are passed back to them. What this means is, you can never reactively prevent an action from occurring. As a point of comparison, let's take a look at Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering has its own form of effect resolution called the stack. Actions don't resolve immediately like they do in Artifact. Instead, whenever an action is taken, time freezes, and that action is added to the stack, a sort of list of not yet resolved actions. Then, priority is given to the other player to respond by adding an action of their own to the top of the stack. Both sides keep adding actions, until they are unable or unwilling, which is when the stack resolves. Time unfreezes, and all of the queued actions resolve one after the other from the top of the stack to the bottom, from the most recently added action, all the way back to that very first action that started the stack in the first place. Actions closer to the top of the stack, actions played later, have priority. Not only this, but actions added later to the stack can retroactively make actions played earlier irrelevant. The stack system incentivizes reactive play. Players are incentivized to hold their cards close to their chest and try to wait and bait out their opponent, because playing reactively in response to your enemy's actions means that your actions happen first, potentially even invalidating their earlier chain of unresolved action. If your opponent plays punch and in response you play cut his arms off, the punch never happens. Cutting his arms off happens first, and he is no longer able to punch at all. In Artifact, it's the opposite. In Artifact, every action resolves instantly before the other side gets a chance to do anything about it. If the opponent tries to buff his hero, it just happens. There is no time freeze. You don't get offered the chance to play a card to kill that creature before it gets buffed. If you were holding that card, you should have done it before the opponent buffed his hero. Artifact favors preemptive play. This is why initiative is important. Initiative means at least one action that is impossible for the opponent to prevent. And, as higher mana cost cards tend to have much higher impact, initiative only becomes more and more relevant as the game goes on. High impact cards tend to irrevocably shift the state of the board beyond the capacity of the opponent to deal with them, or simply deny the opponent a chance to take any action at all. Late game turns can resemble a game of chicken, where the last player to take an action gives up the right of first play in the following lane. At times, initiative becomes so important that players purposely take no action at all, despite having other cards and resources available, to ensure first action in a more relevant, important lane. But anticipating and playing around cards in this way can be a difficult process, especially when the way Artifact resolves actions denies players clear feedback. In Magic the Gathering, if you expected that the opponent was about to play a large impact card, you'd at least get to see the opponent play it, before having the opportunity to react and stop it. There would always be clear and obvious feedback on exactly what it was you just stopped, but anticipating cards in Artifact is, as always, more complicated. In Artifact, if the opponent manages to have initiative and cast a high impact card like Thunder God's Wrath, it's already a done deal. It happened. You can't do anything to stop it. You just get to pick up the pieces. No, in Artifact, you have to play the role of a prognosticating meteorologist. You have to anticipate and predict a chance of Thunder God's Wrath before it ever happens. Playing around denying the opponent Thunder God's Wrath doesn't revolve around a reactive counterplay. In Artifact, your reactive play is trying to kill Zeus and other blue heroes to stop the opponent from ever being able to cast Thunder God's Wrath in the first place. You preemptively remove even the capacity to cast a spell on the chance your opponent might have the card. The feedback is vague. You don't know exactly what you stopped or even if you're right to make the call in trying to stop it. You can't react to something that's already happened, so you play around stopping the possibility itself. You have to anticipate and stop what is to come. You have to be preemptive and preventative. But successfully anticipating cards in this way is contingent on knowing what to anticipate, around denying what seems like a likely plan of action. It requires game knowledge. It requires a player have an expectation of what is likely and possible. And generally speaking, players know what to expect. They know the impact of cards rise with mana costs. They know that black has access to direct damage spells, and blue to board-wide damage, and so on. But even then, at a certain point, simple heuristics only get you so far. Properly anticipating cards requires an active understanding of the possibilities at play. It demands a buy-in of familiarity with the knowledge base. But Artifact makes gaining this kind of familiarity difficult. It denies the player clear feedback, or at least half of the feedback. It's clear enough when you've done wrong. There's plenty of times you see and fail to prevent the opponent from doing something to ruin your day, but it's a lot less clear the other way around. You only get to see when the opponent gets his Thunder God's Wrath off. You don't get to see when you stop it. This stilts the learning process of the game. The player doesn't know what they prevented. The player just blocks options with a vague idea of what they achieved. And this is monumental. Because in terms of player experience, in terms of feedback, well, you get the same thing you do with Artifact's lock mechanic. Cladrine Hourglass, Fractured Timeline, Buying Time, and Lost in Time are all cards that delay the casting of a random, unseen card in the opponent's hand. The way the player experiences lock is exactly the same kind of experience you get when you try and anticipate and prevent the opponent from taking an action. You don't know what you preemptively stopped. You don't know what kind of impact delaying that hidden card achieved. The feedback is invisible to the player. Compared to a traditional discard effect, from a pure feedback perspective, this card shows the player exactly what the opponent was forced to throw away. It provides instant feedback for the player to instantly judge and evaluate. If a player forced the opponent to discard a valuable resource, then they can see and judge how the lack of that resource affected the state of the game. But Artifact delays or never provides this kind of a reveal. The nature of lock and preemptive play in Artifact makes it harder to figure out exactly what you ended up achieving, or even if it was worth the cost. This seems to me the biggest wall that Artifact presents. It is a game with mechanics that incentivize anticipating your opponent with preemptive play, but denies players the tools to learn how to do so properly. The process of active improvement, of learning the game, gets bogged down in ambiguity. All of this ambiguous feedback has predictable effects. When it is harder to evaluate value, when it is harder to identify or notice the trade-offs inherent in the game, it becomes that much harder to actively improve. Players who cannot identify what they did wrong don't know how to get better. And what recourse is left to a player that doesn't know how to improve? Given time, there's little left to do but point fingers and vanish in a puff of angry blame. Justified blame. When obvious avenues of improvement are not present, frustration replaces the drive for mastery. But thankfully, this is not something that is entirely unsolvable. Many of the issues discussed in this video stem from an information deficit, frustration from a lack of understanding, a lack of communication on the game's part. And it is a natural way of games that information liquidity builds over time. More time means more cards, more information, and most importantly, more access to that information. Accessible replays are one of the best tools suited for this end. Players can look back at their own games with perfect information at the pace they choose. Effects like lock can be evaluated more clearly instead of only being guessed at. Players can see exactly what actions they denied, exactly when their pressure resulted in less optimal plays for their opponent. Teaching cards also help along this end. Cards designed specifically to highlight the more obscure interactions of play. Newer players can be primed to pay attention and notice the value of initiative with cards that force attention to the mechanic. A simple example of this would be a minion that gains some upside based on whether or not a player started or ended the turn with initiative. Just So was a suite of cards designed towards keeping opposing heroes locked in a lane. So, where does this leave us? The reality is that even with ideal information liquidity, Artifact will never be simple. Complexity is built into its very DNA. It is not a game where, after a steep learning curve, the best line of play will always be obvious. To the contrary, Artifact is built for those who like that there is no easy answer. Those who, when asked, "Hey, what's the best move here?" are happy to say, "I don't know, but probably this," with a big stupid smile on their face. Artifact is a game where most moves come laden with trade-offs, where actions have cascading, hard-to-evaluate effects across multiple turns. A game that rewards strategic anticipation and modular, flexible planning. Because Artifact knows what it's about. Everything in it points towards a unified, purposeful direction. It's just uninterested in communicating it. Artifact is like running through a shifting, invisible maze. You only get to see the walls when you run straight into them. And really, that's the game in a nutshell. At the end of the day, Artifact doesn't want to teach you. It just wants you to learn.